ക്രിസ്തു ജനിച്ചതിനും ജീവിച്ചിരുന്നതിനുമായി വിശ്വാസികൾ ഉയർത്തിക്കാണിക്കുന്ന AD BC കാലഘടനയാണ്. അതായത് ക്രിസ്തു ജനിച്ചില്ലായിരുന്നുവെങ്കിൽ എങ്ങനെ ക്രിസ്തുവിന് മുൻപും ശേഷവും എന്നിങ്ങനെ രണ്ട് കാലം ഉണ്ടാകുമെന്നതാണ് ചോദ്യം. ചരിത്രത്തെ രണ്ടായി വിഭജിച്ച സംഭവമാണ് ക്രിസ്തുവിൻ്റെ ജനനമെന്ന് പലരും പറയാറുണ്ടെങ്കിലും സംഭവത്തിൻ്റെ തെളിവുകൾ പൂജ്യമാണ്. ക്രിസ്മസ് മാത്രമല്ല, ഈസ്റ്ററിന് പിന്നിലും ഇത്തരം പുരാതന ചരിത്രമുണ്ട്. മെസപ്പൊട്ടോമിയൻ ദേവതയായിരുന്ന ഇഷ്താറിന്റെ ഇനാന എന്നറിയപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ട്. അവരുടെ മരണദിവസമാണ് പിൽക്കാലത്ത് ഈസ്റ്ററായി പരിണമിച്ചത്. ഇഷ്താർ ദേവതയെ വസ്ത്രങ്ങൾ ഉരിഞ്ഞു മാറ്റി ഒരു കൊളുത്തിൽ തൂക്കി കൊല്ലുകയായിരുന്നു ചെയ്തിരുന്നത്. ഇത്തരത്തിൽ ഈ പഴയകാല ദൈവസങ്കല്പങ്ങൾ പലതും സൂര്യനെയോ മറ്റ് ഗ്രഹങ്ങളെയോ അടിസ്ഥാനപ്പെടുത്തി ഉണ്ടാക്കിയതാണ്. അങ്ങനെ തന്നെ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ സാധിക്കും. ഈ പുരാതന ബാബിലോണിയൻ ഈജിപ്ഷ്യൻ കഥകളിൽ നിന്നും കോപ്പിയടിച്ച കുറേ കഥകളിൽ നിന്നും കോൺസ്റ്റന്റൈൻ തട്ടിക്കൂട്ടിയ ഒരു ആദൈവമായിരുന്നു ക്രിസ്തു എന്ന് വേണമെങ്കിൽ പറയാം. അതിനുശേഷമാണ് ക്രിസ്തുവിനൊരു ഭൂതവും ഭാവിയും വർത്തമാനവും ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. അതിനായി ബാബിലോണിയൻ, ഗ്രീക്ക്, ഈജിപ്ഷ്യൻ, സുമേറിയൻ ദൈവങ്ങളെയും അവരുടെ മിത്തുകളെയും അദ്ദേഹം എടുത്ത് ഉപയോഗിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു.
The critics claim that the evidence for Christ and Christmas is zero, and that stories of Christ are molded by Constantine using the mythological gods and goddesses of the ancient civilizations. Did Jesus of Nazareth exist as a real human being? Outside of the New Testament, what is the evidence for his existence? We can examine the extra-biblical textual and archaeological evidence associated with the man who would become the central figure in Christianity. The critics are often sick to think that the biblical evidence for Jesus is biased, because it is encased in a theological text written by committed believers. Hence to the critics, let us see whether there is extra-biblical evidence for the historical existence of Jesus. Cornelius Tacitus was a Roman senator, orator and ethnographer, and arguably the best of Roman historians. Roman historian Tacitus's last major work, Annals, mentions a Christus who was executed by Pontius Pilate and from whom the Christians derived their name. The other strong evidence that speaks directly about Jesus as a real person comes from Josephus, a Jewish priest who grew up as an aristocrat in 1st century Palestine and ended up living in Rome, supported by the patronage of 3 successive emperors. In his 2 great works, The Jewish War and Jewish Antiquities, both written in Greek for educated people, Josephus tried to appeal to aristocrats in the Roman world, presenting Judaism as a religion to be admired for its moral and philosophical depth. The Jewish War doesn't mention Jesus except in some versions in likely later editions by others, but Jewish Antiquities does mention Jesus, twice. The shorter of these 2 references to Jesus is incidental to identifying Jesus' brother James, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. Thus, the following facts are clear from the secular historical documents. It is clear that Jesus existed as a man. If any Jewish writer were ever in a position to know about the non-existence of Jesus, it would have been Josephus. His implicit affirmation of the existence of Jesus has been, and still is, the most significant obstacle for those who argue that the extra-biblical evidence is not probative on this point. And Tacitus was careful enough not to report real executions of non-existent people. His personal name was Jesus, as Josephus informs us. He was called Christos in Greek, which is a translation of the Hebrew word Messiah, both of which mean anointed or the anointed one, as Josephus states and Tacitus implies, unaware, by reporting, as Romans thought, that his name was Christus. He had a brother named James or Jacob, as Josephus reports. He won over both Jews and Greeks, that is, Gentiles of Hellenistic culture, according to Josephus, although it is anachronistic to say that they were many at the end of his life. Large growth in the number of Jesus' actual followers came only after his death. Jewish leaders of the day expressed unfavorable opinions about him. Pilate rendered the decision that he should be executed, as both Tacitus and Josephus state. His execution was specifically by crucifixion, according to Josephus. He was executed during Pontius Pilate's governorship over Judea, between 26 and 36 CE, as Josephus implies and Tacitus states, adding that it was during Tiberius's reign. Some of Jesus' followers did not abandon their personal loyalty to him even after his crucifixion but submitted to his teaching. They believed that Jesus later appeared to them alive in accordance with prophecies, most likely those found in the Hebrew Bible. A well-attested link between Jesus and Christians is that Christ, as a term used to identify Jesus, became the basis of the term used to identify his followers, Christians. The Christian movement began in Judea, according to Tacitus. Josephus observes that it continued during the 1st century. Tacitus deplores the fact that during the 2nd century it had spread as far as Rome. As far as we know, no ancient person ever seriously argued that Jesus did not exist. No pagans and Jews who opposed Christianity denied Jesus' historicity or even questioned it. Non-denial of Jesus' existence is particularly notable in rabbinic writings of those first several centuries. If anyone in the ancient world had a reason to dislike the Christian faith, it was the rabbis. To argue successfully that Jesus never existed but was a creation of early Christians would have been the most effective polemic against Christianity. Yet all Jewish sources treated Jesus as a fully historical person. The rabbis used the real events of Jesus' life against him. Thus, his birth, ministry and death occasioned claims that his birth was illegitimate, and that he performed miracles by evil magic, encouraged apostasy and was justly executed for his own sins. But they do not deny his existence. Lucian of Samosata was a Greek satirist who, without naming Jesus, clearly refers to him. Celsus, the Platonist philosopher, considered Jesus to be a magician who made exorbitant claims. Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor and friend of Tacitus, wrote about early Christian worship of Christ as to a god. Suetonius, a Roman writer, lawyer and historian, wrote of riots in 49 CE among Jews in Rome which might have been about Christus but which he thought were incited by the instigator Chrestus, whose identification with Jesus is not completely certain. Mara bar Serapion, a prisoner of war held by the Romans, wrote a letter to his son that described the wise Jewish king in a way that seems to indicate Jesus but does not specify his identity. As a final observation, in New Testament scholarship generally, a number of specialists consider the question of whether Jesus existed to have been finally and conclusively settled in the affirmative. The view that Jesus Christ is not a historical figure, and that he is a fraud person, is a very odd view. Not even most of the critics of Christianity will accept this kind of a petty view. Most Hindus will not agree with this view. Prominent Hindus such as Swami Vivekananda, and Mahatma Gandhi etc. did have a very honorable view of Jesus, as a historical person, and the foremost moral teacher. Muslims believe Jesus as historical person, and as a holy prophet. Most atheists also consider Jesus as a historical person. Those critics who question the historicity of Jesus, are masters of double standards. Will they also deny the historicity of Muhammad, Socrates, Plato, Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi etc.? On the basis of what criteria, you will approve some or deny some? The only problem of the critics is that Jesus is too good and his actions were beyond the human capability to grasp and believe. Whether people believe in Jesus or not, the historical fact about Jesus remains the same. The anti-Christian forces thought that they can attack the historicity of Christ, and thereby argue that Christ is not a historical figure, and is only a myth. But the fact is that, if you apply the same criteria, then no person in history will be considered as a historical figure, all will be more mythological than Christ. This means that, there is no one else in the history of mankind, who is more historical than Jesus Christ. If he is a myth, then everything else is also a myth. Your personal response to Jesus is crucial to your eternity. You can begin to personally know God in this life on earth, and after death into eternity. Jesus took our sin on himself, on the cross. He chose to receive punishment for our sin, so that our sin would no longer be a barrier between us and him. Here is how you can begin that relationship. Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door of your heart, and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him. There is no middle ground and no one can be neutral to Jesus. Who else in the history of the world has ever made such claims and continued to receive a great following? We must accept him for exactly who he says he is, or else we must reject him as a liar. Surely, he cannot be a good man and be just another great religious teacher. So, just by themselves the claims of Jesus compel us either to reject him as a liar, cheat, and fraud, or else to accept him as the divine Son of God, the ruler of the universe, and the Savior of the world. There is no middle ground. Even those who deny his deity affirm that he was a great moral teacher. However, they fail to realize the contradiction. Jesus could hardly be a great moral teacher if he ever told a lie. He claimed to be God in human form. And that must be right, as Jesus cannot tell a lie. So close was Jesus' connection with God that he equated a person's attitude to himself with the person's attitude toward God. Thus, to know him was to know God. To see him was to see God. To believe in him was to believe in God. To receive him was to receive God. To hate him was to hate God. And to honor him was to honor God.